You ever have a moment in your life that you can't explain? A moment where something happens that completely breaks your understanding of how the world works? 10 years ago, I met a one-eyed old man under a piece of New York City scaffolding. He told me not to be afraid. Then he disappeared. A few months later, I realized I might have met Odin, and that realization changed my life forever. This is I Am Heathen, and so can you.
You learned enough.
I am heathen.
And so can you.
Are you getting a bar mitzvah? Or should we hold our breath? I'll never forget that question. A family member asked it on my 13th birthday. Now, if you know Jewish families, you know that really wasn't a question. That was a concern. The kind of concern usually reserved for things like medical school, grandchildren, or why somebody isn't eating enough brisket. I was born ethnically and spiritually Jewish. But my upbringing wasn't exactly traditional. My sister and I grew up in a community where, as far as I could tell, my mom, my dad, and I were the only Jews under the age of 65. At 13 years old, religion didn't mean much to me. Religion meant two things: better food than my mom cooked, sorry mom, and 8 straight days of presents during Hanukkah. Not bad, honestly. But things changed. Because the moment someone in school realized I was Jewish, the classics started. You killed Jesus, which is a strange accusation to throw at a tubby 13-year-old kid from Queens. Apparently, I had secretly gone back in time and helped the Roman Empire run a crucifixion. News to me. But the ugliness escalated. Swastikas drawn on my backpack. Die Kike written across my locker. And one afternoon, my head smashed into that same locker. At 13 years old, I went home terrified, hugging my father and crying into his shirt because I thought I might be killed simply for being Jewish. And that moment did something strange to my relationship with religion. Not hatred, not anger, just distance. Because something that meant so much to my family had suddenly become something that hurt. I'm originally from Woodside, Queens, an Irish enclave in one of the most diverse boroughs on earth. Half the people around me weren't born in the United States. I grew up around Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Catholics, every religion imaginable. And strangely enough, religion itself was never the issue. People saw the person first, the faith second. But when you're young and something like that happens to you, it leaves questions. So like many confused teenagers before me, I entered what can only be described as my philosophical hippie phase. I read everything. Occult philosophy, Eastern religion, mysticism, esoteric weirdness that would have given my grandmother heart palpitations. And one day, I stumbled onto a book that hit me like lightning. William Blake, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And reading that book, I can only describe as doing shrooms for the first time. Immersive, violent, beautiful. And one line in that book is eternally burned into my mind. As the caterpillar chooses the fairest of leaves to lay her eggs, so the priest lays his curse on the fairest of joys. I wanted more. I needed more. For nearly 15 years, I chased philosophy, religion, and mysticism, trying to understand where I fit in the world. Because none of it quite fit. You ever buy a jacket that looks incredible on the rack, but when you put it on, you realize it just doesn't suit you? That's what my spiritual life felt like. Not atheist, not agnostic, just a man with faith who didn't know where to place it. Until 2015. I was walking down a New York street, and if you've lived here long enough, you know scaffolding is basically part of the natural ecosystem. Steel poles, green plywood, and that strange dim light you get when the sun filters through construction netting. I stepped underneath one of these scaffolds when suddenly, bang! Something slammed into the metal roof above me. Not a small sound, mind you. Something heavy. Something alive. So I stopped. And I looked up. And that's when the sky exploded. Wings. Black wings. Hundreds of them. Crows bursting upward like a storm breaking loose. They weren't flying away. They were flying toward me. Now, when several hundred crows launch themselves in your direction, your brain stops doing philosophy and starts doing survival instincts. So naturally, I started flailing like a lunatic. And in the middle of this very dignified display, I ran into somebody. An old man, late 70s, wispy white hair, checkered shirt, pocket protector, the left lens missing from his glasses. And behind that broken lens, his left eye was milky white. He looked at me and he smiled. And that smile, for whatever reason, felt like a hug. "Don't be afraid," he said. And by the time I answered, "I'm not," I was suddenly 500 feet down the street. The birds were gone. The old man was gone. Just gone. All right, everybody. Let's take a breath and reflect on the bomb I just dropped, because I've got something real special I'd like to share. All right. Hold up for a second. Before we get back into the story, and I keep talking about gods and whatever theological fistfight I'm about to start next, I gotta talk to you about the common hearth. Now listen, I'm a New York guy, born and raised around noise, food, arguments, and people who will absolutely tell you when you're wrong. I'm Jewish. I grew up around tables that were never quiet. Somebody's aunt yelling about politics, somebody's uncle arguing about history, somebody in the kitchen turning out food that smells like it could resurrect the dead. That is what community looks like to me. Not silence, not gatekeeping. A table full of people and a pot that never runs empty. That is the spirit behind the common hearth. It's a heathen community built around the idea that faith isn't supposed to be sterile or lonely. It's supposed to feel like a kitchen at midnight. Somebody stirring a pot of something dangerous, somebody pouring drinks, and somebody telling a story about the gods that makes the whole room stop and listen. At the common hearth, of course we're talking lore. We talk about ritual, we share the old stories, the history behind them, and how to live this faith in the modern world without losing your damn mind. But more than anything, we build community. Think of it like this. If Valhalla had a kitchen, which it does, if the sagas were told over plates of food and a few strong drinks, that's the whole vibe. No nonsense, no weird racial garbage. Just people who love the gods, the ancestors, the spirits, people who love learning and love pulling up a chair around the fire. So if that's your kind of place, come find us. You can join us on Facebook at The Common Hearth, where the community lives. You can also follow us on TikTok, where we post lore dives, discussion, and a little bit of heathen chaos from time to time. Just search The Common Hearth. Pull up a chair. There's always room at the table. For a few days, I didn't tell anyone. But the last thing I wanted was to become one of those people who claim they saw Jesus in their breakfast toast. So I went to a neurologist. Clean bill of health. No brain injury. Apparently, I was just stressed. Months passed. Then something strange happened. I developed shingles in my left eye, bad enough that I had to wear an eye patch, which meant I couldn't do much except sit around and read. And among the books a friend gave me was the Prose Edda. I started reading stories of the old gods, and somewhere in those pages, something cold ran down my spine, because suddenly I remembered the birds, hundreds of them. A storm of black wings exploding into the sky. And in the old stories, the Allfather was never alone. 2 ravens fly the world each day, watching, listening, bringing news back to him. I kept reading. The wandering traveler, the missing eye, the old man who appears when you least expect him, and disappears just as suddenly. And suddenly, I was sitting there, book in my hands, eye patch over my left eye, thinking about the old man under the scaffold. And the realization hit me like thunder. I may have met Odin. And if you read those stories closely, you'll notice something. The people who meet Odin on the road almost never realize who he is in the moment. They understand it later. Sometimes hours later, sometimes years later, sometimes only after they've already walked away. Which means that somewhere in the sagas, there are probably a lot of people who met him and never knew it at all. And the strange thing about faith is that it never arrives the way you expect it. Some people find their God in a synagogue. Some people find their God in a church. Some people find their God in a temple. Me? I found mine under New York City scaffolding while being dive-bombed by a murder of crows, and somehow that makes perfect sense, because the old gods were never tidy. They weren't safe. They lived in storms, in forests, in those strange moments that make you question reality. And sometimes they show up looking like somebody's grandfather with one bad eye, which I'll admit is probably not the spiritual journey my grandmother had in mind for me. She was probably hoping for rabbi. Instead, she got a guy who met Odin under scaffolding in Queens. The funny thing about faith is that sometimes it's the path you walk. It doesn't look like anything the one people expected you to take. I was born into a Jewish family, raised around traditions thousands of years old, stories of wandering, stories of searching, and in a strange way, I never really left that story. Because wandering in search of wisdom is something my ancestors understood very well. Maybe that's why the old man with the one bad eye didn't feel frightening when I finally understood who he was. He felt familiar, like a traveler you meet on the road who reminds you that the road itself is sacred. If tonight's story meant something to you, if it made you think, if it made you laugh, or maybe see the old gods in the world just a little differently, do me a favor, and please, be a mensch, like the episode. Leave a comment, and share it with somebody who might enjoy the conversation, because good stories deserve good company, and the more people we bring to the hearth, the better the stories become. And that, my friends, is all the time we have for today. I enjoyed the hell out of recording this episode, I'm not gonna lie. If you want to connect with us on social media, you can find us on Facebook at I Am Heathen, and so can you. You can find us on TikTok at The Common Hearth, and if you want to connect with me on a more personal level, you can find me on TikTok at Einar Blackthorn or on Instagram at Hearth and Blade. And naturally, we will be keeping to tradition in tonight's episode. If you've got a drink nearby, raise it with me. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the ancestors, hail the spirits, and most importantly, hail yourselves. Skål, my friends, and remember, the fire's always burning here. Never forget it, all right?